Um, I appreciate the introduction, Dan. And as a philanthropist, I especially focus on systemic change and organizations that transform people's lives. And so when I approached Dan with the idea of doing this panel, and he said yes, I was very grateful. Thank you, Dan. I'm really honored and moved to moderate this discussion about an organization that has had just a massively positive impact on Los Angeles, as well as an additional 400 cities throughout the world as part of the global Homeboy network. Um, Homeboy Industries, it's the largest gang rehabilitation and reentry organization in the world. I like to find organizations that provide second, third, fourth chances, whatever is needed. And Homeboy does exactly that. They prove that formerly incarcerated people do deserve rehabilitation. So I'm joined on stage by three incredible people from Homeboy, and each has their own unique and wonderful story. And I know that Dan just mentioned who they all are. Um, Father G is the founder of Homeboy. Um, his vision was born from his work, as Dan mentioned, as a Jesuit priest in Boyle Heights, which is one of the most underserved and gang impacted neighborhoods in Los Angeles. And actually, my dad was born and raised in Boyle Heights. He has um, unceasingly worked to break the devastating cycles of violence, poverty, and incarceration that traps countless individuals and families. Um, he created Homeboy to offer a way out, a place where former rivals could stand side by side to build a much better future. Um, Father G received the Presidential Medal of Freedom last year for his life's work, which was quite incredible. Yes. Also joining us is Homeboy's new co-CEO, Shirley Torres. Shirley has been with Homeboy for over 20 years, and she's been very instrumental in the organization's evolution. She's helped guide Homeboy to unprecedented growth with her innovative ideas and expansion of their support services. She co-created Homeboy's 18-month reentry program, which includes educational pathways and job training. And finally, we have someone that can attest firsthand to Homeboy's transformative powers, Steve Avalos. Steve is Homeboy's Vice President of Operations. But first, he was a client, or as they call him, a homie. He came through the doors at Homeboy in 2012 after serving a life sentence. Now, he oversees a team at Homeboy that works with other homies in the 18-month reentry program. The way that Steve describes Homeboy is beautiful. He says it's a place where there is love for the unloved and hope for the hopeless. So, no pressure for the three of you. But as I told Dan, and he mentioned it too, that this will be one of the most impressive and important panel discussions Aspen Ideas has ever seen. So we're going to start with our questions for our three panelists, and I'm going to kick off the conversation with a question to the other woman sitting here with me. Shirley, you've been a part of Homeboy for over 25 years. And now that you've succeeded Tom Vozo, whom I adore, and I highly recommend his book, The Homeboy Way, to everyone. It's a very good read. So for you, Shirley, what's Homeboy's secret sauce?
That's a great question. First of all, thank you, Melanie, and thank you for the invitation to be and share space with all of you and give you a window into our work. It's really been my life's privilege. Everything you said about Tom resonates in my heart. We love and respect him and are honored to lead the organization forward. After almost 25 years of paying attention to a swing of the door, I think without hesitation, I know that the secret sauce lives in the people that we stand with. It's not about the resources or the program even. It's really about an approach and a culture of relational tenderness where we see underneath the behavior, where we receive people in community, and we're all transformed by it. I'm not the same person who walked through those doors. And I sit here and share this space with two of my personal heroes who have helped me be a better mother, a better human being. And really, when you talk about the innovation of Homeboy, I think part of what for me has been the secret sauce is this idea of connecting people with people first. So that in that community, you're leading with trusting people, and rather than seeing them for the worst thing they've done, you're actually honoring them as anthems of resiliency. I think about all my time there and all the stories, and the more that you can listen and hold and receive people, you realize, wow, they survived that and they still have the courage to come through those doors and keep getting up, even as life can present them unimaginable childhood trauma, but even recurring trauma through incarceration and systems of care and supervision that are supposed to hold us together. So again, I just think the secret sauce isn't that secret at Homeboy. It's love made visible. It's every single day believing in a kind of spaciousness where suffering and joy can coexist, And lately, because of the state of the world, I think about just how blessed I am. And I keep telling our staff and some of the trainees that there's no other place on earth I'd rather be. And there's no other group of folks I'd rather be with in this lifetime than with the people that I share space with. And again, so much of it is this approach that is not just love as an idea, but that idea made possible through the people. And this sort of what I would say the world would consider an irrational commitment to abundance. When I think of so many of the people we've received through the doors, just when you think they've, been harmed, or they start talking about forgiving the people they harmed them in this deep way that makes you question what's the work that you have to do as a human being to ensure that you're part of the work that is about understanding that we're erasing the things that separate us and that we're connected to each other. And so, I happened to see Toni Morrison's picture as I walked in through the doors, and I think about this thing she talks about. And she asked a group of parents in a sit-down with Oprah some years ago, where she said, as parents, we have to ask ourselves, do you light up when your child walks through the door? And when I think about Homeboy's secret sauce, I think about how all of us, no matter what our titles are, we light up, arms wide open, to receive the person that's walking through the door, and we're received by them. And that's really, I think, what makes Homeboy so special. I've traveled and I've seen other programs. When I came through the doors, Father Greg did everything from his front desk. And we've evolved. And we've evolved by not just checking the box, but checking the pulse and really understanding that that we needed to do more than jobs. We needed to provide and afford healing to people who were never given the chance to heal, and have a trusting environment to go to the places that are most painful. And that's really what home is about, the invitation.
Yeah. Well, that's beautifully said. And I do remember with Toni Morrison and Oprah. And the whole concept of what you said is beautiful.
Thank you.
Now, Steve, I have a question for you. Um, you have firsthand experience with Homeboy Secret Sauce because you first started out as a client. So, talk to us about your background and what led you to walk through the doors at Homeboy.
My name's Steve. My background. Well, first I just want to start by I'm beyond grateful for the opportunity to experience Homeboy. I mean, like you talk about, this is like living in a dark cave, and somebody puts a flame, and you didn't even know that a flame existed. You know, it's like just living in a place of hopelessness. That's kind of that was my experience before Homeboy. I grew up in a generation of gangs. When I say a generation of gangs, I mean my mother, my father, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, my brother. We were all from the same neighborhood, from Los Angeles. My father was murdered before I was born. My mom's sister was murdered shortly after that. My mom's brother was sentenced to life without in prison. My mom married my stepdad when I was 2 years old. He was originally on death row, but the death penalty was ruled unconstitutional in the 70s, and everyone on death row ended up with life in prison. And that was the way life was. But when you're part of that life, you see it for what it is. There's a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. Prison, it becomes normal. So I didn't want no part of it. Baseball was my passion, just staying on the field. But when I was 11 years old, my brother was 15 years old. He was already from the gang since he was 13 years old, and they killed him behind gang violence. And I don't know, there was something inside of me where I felt like maybe this is the way life is. Maybe gangs is something that's just what I was meant to be, a gang member. By the time I was 14 years old, my mom didn't know what to do with me anymore. I had already been in and out of jail, incarcerated, and she didn't know if I would be in the front of a gun or behind the gun, but either way, she wanted to say that's enough. So from 14 years old, I was running the streets. I basically, I didn't really have a house. I would just go house to house, you say homeless. By the time I was 17 years old, I was tried as an adult fitness here in the 707, and I was sentenced to life in prison behind gang violence. Throughout that time in prison, a lot of things changed in my life, and I got an opportunity. I had met many people in there, my uncle for the first time, my stepdad. But I say that because it goes along the lines of eventually, by being cross paths with my stepdad, I got to meet Father Greg Boyle. And at that time, I had life in prison. I didn't know if I would ever come home. But for some reason, like G gave me hope in there. Like if I did ever come home, there would be a place for me, for a gang member. And like, what do you do with somebody that just all they know is this lifestyle? You send them to Homeboy Industries. So long story short, after 17 years, I was, through the governor, I was given an opportunity to come home. And I went to Homeboy Industries. And Father Greg, the first time I met Father Greg, he gave me a hug, and he gave me a job. But more than anything, he gave me a second chance at life. That breaks the cycle for my children to ever become gang members.
Mm-hmm. Steve, thank you. So heartfelt in the way you tell your story. Very inspirational. Father Greg, let's go back 32 years to when you founded Homeboy. Would you describe the why for the reasons that you founded Homeboy Industries?
Oh, well, thank you, Melanie and Dan, and privileged to be with you guys. Yeah, I was a very young pastor of the poorest parish in the city, Dolores Mission. And it was nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens, Aliso Village, largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. And it had 8 gangs at war with each other, which was unheard of in public housing to have that many. So I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988. And 3 months ago, I buried my 263rd.
Oh.
Not all from that community, obviously, but I kept count because in those days, you know, it was clear that a life in somewhere else was struck down, was worth more than 8 in my community. And there was a period where I buried 8 young people in a 3-week period. And nobody cared, and there was no articles, or there was nothing. It's like they didn't matter. That's why I kind of oddly kept track, because they matter. And so we have this notion that that just perhaps there might be lives out there that matter less than other lives. So that was was brewing. And but it was like you have to roll up your sleeves and you have to do something, because the shootings were morning, noon, and night. And the LAPD called my parish the place of the highest concentration of gang activity in the whole city. So if LA was the gang capital of the world, my parish was the gang capital of Los Angeles. And Stephanie knows, she grew up in that community. So we did things. You know, we started a school because in those days they started to say we just can't deal with gang members in our schools. There was a long period where they did, but then they said no. I can't say that I actually blame them, because they were trying to educate kids and fights and stuff. So we had junior high kids, gang members who had been given the boot, and they would wreak havoc in the middle of the day, violent, selling drugs. And so I walked out to them and I said, hey, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And every single one said yes. I would kind of isolate them and ask them the question. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them, so that kind of forced my hand. So we, across the street from the church was our parochial school, and first 2 floors, K to 8. And then the entire 3rd floor was the convent where the nuns lived. And so I sat them down one evening in their living room, and I said, hey, you know, would you mind, you know, moving out? And we could turn the convent into a school for gang members. And they looked at each other, they said, sure. And that was the extent of their discernment process. And anyway, long story short, we started a school, and then they kept saying if only we had jobs. And so we tried to find felony-friendly employers, and we couldn't find hardly any. So we started things, a maintenance crew, landscaping crew, all made up of members of the 8 gangs. And then the unrest happened in '92 after the acquittal of the 4 police officers who beat down Rodney King. And we were the poorest pocket in the city, and we didn't erupt. And so the LA Times wanted to know why that was. And I said, well, I don't know, maybe part of it is because we had 60 strategically hired rival gang members who had a reason to get up in the morning, and a reason not to gangbang the night before, and a reason not to torch their own community. So the LA Times wrote an article. Ray Stark read the article, summoned me to his Beverly Hills office, and he said, how should I spend my money? And as I look back on it now, I can see that I woefully undershot my request. But I was young. So I said, well, you could buy this abandoned bakery across the street from the school. And it has ovens. They don't work, but you could fix them. We could put hair nets on gang members. Anyway, the rest is history. But what Shirley, both Shirley and Steve said, you know, flame and light. And so we listened to gang members, and they said, if only we had jobs. And so let's get jobs. And we had T-shirts that said, nothing stops a bullet like a job. And that's because we listened. But then we knew them. And then we went, oh, no. And we really shifted. It was right around the time you came. I think it's 20, 25 years ago that we said, no, an educated gang member may or may not go back to prison, or an employed one may or may not. But then it became our contention, and we've never wavered since then, that a healed gang member will not reoffend. And so, and that breaks the cycle, as Stevie was saying, with, your kids. And so, and then we shifted. We do all the things that everybody does, therapy and education and groups and anger management or whatever it is, parenting. But that's all secondary to the healing. And, it's so important that therapy, I look at Bill, but that becomes, and that, when we began, that was just nobody, it was too stigmatized. Gang member said, never, I'm not crazy. And then it shifted, and now we have a waiting list, which we'd never have had for homies to see therapists, And that would have been inconceivable 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So the healing thing is, 18 months training program. We call them trainees, and then they leave us after 18 months. They don't want to leave us, because it's more home than home, they always say. But then, they've become sturdy and resilient because they've been cherished into knowing their true selves and loving. And I don't believe I've ever transformed a life, period, the end, ever. But I know that transformation happens there. All hands on deck, everybody's supplying a dose so that the flame and the light that people experience is, and then they leave us and they become a light that people can see by. We're talking about the times in which we currently live, we were talking earlier. And, they're going to the protests, they're becoming, their true selves in loving, but they're lights that people can see by. And they leave us and the world's going to throw at them what it will, but this time they won't be toppled. So that's kind of, but I never had a plan. It was all response. What do we do next? And I bet if we started tattoo removal, maybe that would help. And then, we just had a graduation, 109 graduates from, GED, high school, AA. 10 years ago we had one graduate. We have 109. So anyway, we're just responding to the folks who are there,
Well, I think in the world we're living in today, this idea of hope is a little harder to come by. And I know, being down at Homeboy Industries, it does make you feel like there is a sense of hope. And it's a wonderful place to be because you do feel the sense of hope. Another question for you, Father G. Mackenzie Scott has given you over 20 million, or has given you 20 million. I shouldn't say over 20.
Feel free.
Really. Listen up, Mackenzie. And others have given you 5 to 10 million at a time. So for the first time in Homeboy's history, you have actually significant money in the bank. So talk to us a little bit about the opportunities as well as the challenges of coming to scale and how with even more resources you can replicate and expand Homeboy.
Yeah, I would never say we have more, enough money in the bank just because, we're $50 million annual operation. We that goes out, and then we have to raise it again.
Right.
So there's not a lot of, you try to do cushion and reserve as sensibly as you can. I
Right.
don't know. I mean, this is why I'm not the CEO at Homeboy Industries, because you don't want me running a $50 million annual operation. But you know, people have wanted us to kind of start Homeboy in other places, and we've always resisted it because Homeboy was born from below in a particular community. And I think we know LA, and we serve LA, and 120,000 gang members and 1,100 gangs. Every single gang member in LA County knows exactly where we are and what we do. Now, they're free to walk in the door or not. But so when Wichita came to us, and you know, mayor and stakeholders said, you know, can you airlift this to Wichita? That's when we had to decide, you know, if we wanted to become the McDonald's of gang intervention programs, you know. And we said no, because we're born from below, and it's you know, and if we went to Wichita, gang members there would say, well, what do you know about Wichita? And they'd be right. So you mentioned the Global Homeboy Network.
Right.
And so, you know, I just went to the grand opening of a new facility of our partner in San Diego, Rise Up Industries. And then a couple of us were in Glasgow for Braveheart Industries. So people are, but it's not just gangs. It's a lot returning citizens. But it's also, you know, name the complex social dilemma that we have to address. And people are using this model of community, a place where people feel cherished, to address mental health issues or the unhoused or whatever it is. So, so scaling up, I never really know. I mean, we grow, but and we don't want to start them all over in Long Beach or whatever. If elected officials say, why don't you come to Long Beach or to the Valley? I go, we serve the Valley. We serve Long Beach.
Right.
They come here, but, you know, other cities and other places, they're happy to come and visit, and we give what we call technical assistance, and start your own thing born from below, you know. So, but, you know, doesn't mean we don't plan. We want to do Hope Village, where we are really offer an alternative to incarceration, not just talk about it, to say, what if we had, you know, all this stuff that we could, you know, housing and direct substance use disorder and mental health issues and art, and so that we could imagine collectively the day when policing is obsolete and prisons are empty. It's okay to imagine that. That's not even naive to imagine that. It's really profoundly okay to imagine it.
It's
So
a good
kind of
thing to
that's
imagine.
Yeah, so that's
It really is. Shirley, you and I have talked about the urgency of the moment. There are 2.1 million people that are incarcerated in the United States. And California spends $132,000 plus annually per inmate. Homeboy support services cost approximately $35,000 a year per person. It's kind of what makes philanthropy such a good problem solver versus, dare I say, government. So Homeboy is a national model with global impact. Share with us your views on the cost to society of incarceration versus the Homeboy way, other than just the $132,000. That's bad enough.
I think a little bit has been, you know, Steve mentioned it a little bit of like the generational impact that we have in standing with an individual and investing in their healing and wholeness, and how that has a ripple effect on their families, and then how then they become contributing members of our community. And I actually think we are the pathway to building healthy communities. You know, they say those that are closest to, you know, the problem and public safety and public health also are closest to the solution. And so our model is really about raising leaders from within. And at every level of our organization, we have someone leading and innovating and again, that is a way forward. I think as a society, we have a tendency to plan for the short term. We try to band-aid our way through major complex issues that has put us in a position where we're the world's largest country that imprisons more people than ever. And I think we should be rattled by the data that tells us that that with mass incarceration, African American child born today has 1 in 3 chances, and a Latino boy born today has 1 in 6 chances of being incarcerated at some point in their lifetime. As someone who's been doing this work, I think it's our moral obligation to find a solution to that, and not just settle for solutions that get people to be less miserable. But if we have a pathway for people to actually be whole and thrive and build healthy communities, then we should invest that. And Homeboy is a concrete alternative to incarceration, as Greg talked about. It started as an organization. I always say it started with a prayer, but it's evolved into this movement that now the world wants to replicate, to really address this idea of how do we alleviate suffering together. And how are we connected to that? And so when I think about the impact that we have, it really is really looking at a long-term solution as the antidote so that we can move into the vision that Greg just described of a day without. And we've made progress, I think, and we have to sort of really challenge the policies that may take us backwards. We have language that didn't exist. We have language now that didn't exist back then. I remember coming to work and everything was about suppression. Everything was about get tough on crime. And that's what landed so many people for even nonviolent crimes in prison. And so I think for us, investing in our social enterprises and flourishing and extending our campus is really about, again, really understanding what it takes to offer people healing for the first time and to really offer them a concrete pathway to purposeful activity. It's important that we honor that in a real, practical way.
Yeah, thank you, Shirley. We're going to go to questions and answers. Hopefully we have the answers. I'm sure this panel does. So if you would raise your hand if you have a question, we will bring a mic to you. Let's start right over there. And she's bringing a mic to you.
I can usually project without a mic. Michael Stubbs, Angelino. First, it's so wonderful to see you here and to have your message spread. You're appalled by the $130,000 per year for adults of the $13 billion CDCR budget, but in fact, it cost over $1 million per child in Los Angeles County.
That's true.
So we have many $4 and $5 million kids, and they could be doing remarkable things. What are your plans going forward with respect to housing and other things that have been sort of on the back boiler and moving forward until I mean, are you going to move forward with housing?
Good question.
Yes, so actually, we have, Greg just described Hope Village, and we just actually secured funding to open up a monastery and turn it into a home of the angels, which would provide transitional housing and a behavioral health campus that would offer residential treatment, transition, and we really are seeing this project as a pilot to our bigger vision to provide transitional and permanent housing on our campus, as one of the many projects that we have to continue to develop our opportunities to really disrupt the status quo for our community and provide pathways to upward mobility. So quality jobs, housing, and again, really thinking about our impact and our reach. As you know, in the time we're living in, the drugs have changed. Trauma is presenting itself differently. We need more support in mental health than we ever imagined. But because we have the trust of the community, people trust us to walk with them and give us permission and are trying things they've never tried before so they could reimagine their lives and their future, and we want to honor that.
Great. Anybody else with a question in the back?
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. I'm Abby Fallick. I'm building something called the Flight School, where we're on a mission to ensure that the rising generation knows what kindles and what dwindles their inner light. And so I'm so moved by the work you do. And Father Boyle, you humbly say that you've not directly transformed people's lives, but I think just from having read the books you've written, it's had an indelible imprint on me. The notion that people become people through people, which I think I read in one of your books, just seared me and stayed with me and really set me on the mission that I've been on. And I'm struck in hearing this conversation by this practice of making love visible through people, the honoring of our wholeness and our healing as what's needed. And that this is the antidote not just to people who've been born in conditions of poverty and found themselves incarcerated, that this is the response that's needed everywhere. I'm just, in this context in particular, thinking about so many of us who appear to have everything and yet are starved for the thing that you're conjuring and offering and regenerating and recycling. So I have deep admiration for staying put where you are and not scaling like a McDonald's. But there's magic here that needs to be set free, and clearly that's part of what you're doing. But I'm just curious about how do we find the potent nodes, even if Homeboy isn't scaling itself? Where are the other nodes? Imagining this process in schools and in corporations and in organizations, this is exactly what we all need. So it's not a precise question, but if you have any reflections on that, I'd be
Stevie,
grateful.
why don't you address like the culture of
Yeah.
love?
So at Homeboy Industries, for us, it's everything about relationships. Relationships heal. Just like bad relationships create trauma, positive, affirmative relationships heal. So we're intentional with a connection. We're intentional with a community of kinship, a place of belonging. From the moment we get there, everything is intentional. When we come together every day, and it's 5 days a week, everything stops at 8:50 in the morning, and we honor one another, whether they got their license, whether they got off parole, whether they got off probation, if it's your birthday. And it's not, when I say intentional, we don't just sing you happy birthday. After we say, and we're glad you were born. And that means something for a lot of our community, because that's not the way they grew up. That's not the way I grew up. And so everything's intentional with relationships, and it's our culture of cherishing, feeling safe, feeling seen. Those are things that we create in our culture that allows whoever walks through that door to experience that, they return that to the next person that walks through the door.
That's great. Right here.
Hi, is this working?
Yes.
I'm Eileen Resnick, and I think what you do is amazing. And kind of piggybacking on what you were sort of asking, I think about, in the session yesterday, they talked a lot about how communities have just been dissolved, and how that's a huge problem in our country right now, is that, that we don't have communities. And I love that you're building the community for the people that are kind of most needed to have that, formerly incarcerated people and such. But what do we do about the other people in the community? And I assume that if you're part of Homeboy Industries, and so then your family sort of it's touched by it and it ripples out. But going back to also, and my question is not that clear, but it's in my head. But what Michael asked about, like the kids, how do we help the kids and the parents build communities so we don't have kids needing to have you after they were involved with gangs or in prison, because the community is strong enough to get them not to go there. So I think what you're doing is so great for the people in it, but how do we ripple it out further, even within LA, which is my home?
Yeah, I think that it is good for the people there. But Homeboy is kind of like the front porch of the house everybody wants to live in. And so you're always projecting out. You're always proffering a notion, what if we were to invest in people rather than just try to incarcerate our way out of stuff? But in the same token, exactly what you say is the notion of community. And then not only that, you can extrapolate. You kind of go, wait a minute, these two guys side by side making croissants used to shoot at each other. So it's not just generic gang member. Everybody has multiple enemies, and from their past and their history. And so you're always trying to project that out into the world where that can become contagious in the same way that, if a traumatized person is likely to cause trauma, as we might say, then it has to be true that a cherished person is going to be able to find their way to cherishing themselves and others. We think that's just a truism at this point. But then when people go, well, what about the next generation? Go, well, Lefty's going home where he has just felt the entire day being cherished and honored and held in high regard, and people are coming at him with a real robust kindness and palpable tenderness. Then he goes home to his kid, and he's doesn't even know exactly that he's parenting in a way that he was never parented. And so suddenly it's all about ripple effect. It's all about ripple effect in Los Angeles. When the bakery burned down in October of '99, prior to that, it was all death threats, bomb threats, and hate mail. Not from gang members, but from people who hated us for helping gang members. But then the bakery burned down, and suddenly it shifted. LA Times said, Homeboy belongs to us and not to Father Greg Boyle. I go, yay, great. Meet my payroll, go. But that really happened. And suddenly, just as Shirley says, the tough on crime thing shifted to smart on crime. And it had that ripple effect. So I think, it's important to have models of community. And we do what we do. But there are lots of models all over the place. And we have to have confidence in the power that love never fails. And that people see it, and it's contagious. Just as I think in the moment in which we live, courage is starting to become contagious.
Yes. We have time for one more question. So Chip, right here.
Father Greg, I'm just thinking about and trying to hold in my heart what your life experience has been at Homeboy, and I'm thinking about kind of the stewardship of pain and all the grief. You talk about all the burials and all the things that you've seen, and for most of us, we would just collapse. And I'm just wondering what you could share with us about what it means to transform that grief, how that happens, whether that's through spiritual practice, what you've learned about kind of the stewardship of grief and how to live with it and move through it.
Well, I think that's what you do. You live through it and you move through it, and you see that death is a punk, as a friend of ours who we had to bury, Moreno, used to say, death is a punk. How can it be the worst thing that happens to us if it's going to happen to all of us? I was talking to my great friend, Kelly Corrigan, this morning, and, about the power of humor, that somehow we laugh more than we grieve at Homeboy. And that's really not a sidebar or a byproduct of something. It's the real deal. It's the homies there say, at Homeboy we laugh from the stomach. Now, on one hand, that makes no damn sense at all. But on the other hand, you go, I know exactly what that is. Where it's not fake, it's not superficial, it's really from the deepest part of you. And I think that's what we mainly do, though everybody there, and recently we've had lots of loss and heartbreak. But we mainly laugh. And I think that's kind of a core principle. Yeah.
There was one other question back there. Can you do it real quick, because we're running out of time? Thank you.
I'll be very quick. Thank you. So I run a meal delivery service based out of Rhode Island, and we have a very intentional policy around hiring where around 25 to 30% of our employees have experienced incarceration at some point. There's a lot of joy in that work, and especially around creating community in that work. But there are definitely some challenges too, to working with a population that has experienced so much trauma. And I guess my question to each of you, or whoever wants to take it, is do you have any advice for companies that are attempting to create community and kind of carry trauma-informed practices into the workplace?
I guess I'll kick it off. I would just say, I think, and this is sort of connected to the earlier dialogue around love and the way that we need to build community. One of the things I was thinking about is just the fearlessness required to be the opposite of the world, to do everything that the world says you shouldn't do, but to do it anyway, because you are grounded in a belief in the goodness of people. And love at Homeboy, it's a real thing. And I always say, part of the reason I stay there is because you get tested. Everything you say you're about as an individual gets tested. And love, I think about love is patient, love is kind. You get to practice that. It's not just a philosophy. It gets tested, and you practice it, and you get grounded in having a light grasp on the rules that are supposed to make you efficient or successful. I think once you have a light grasp on that and aren't really focused on the outcomes, but on the experience that you're creating, and you're committed fully to that, then I think things align in your favor. And I think I've seen it happen in all of the phases that I've been there. There's times we didn't have money in the bank, but we still put the foot on the gas, and we had a fearless leader that showed us the way. And now it's a language, but it is a practice. And I think part of what happens is we get caught up in this idea that things are one way because the world is transactional. But when you believe in the exquisite mutuality of love, you believe in both the intentionality and the patience that's required to practice love. And so I think for me, I think you have to always be grounded in your why. Your why has to be bigger than all the buts that will come up. And that will always give you the fearlessness and courage to keep going and then flourish.
Thank you, Shirley. That's wonderful. Well, we've rapidly run out of time. But I do want to close with one final thought about Homeboy and the incredible community that these three incredible people and so many others have built. I can't think of an organization that better represents a story I want to share with you. My vision is for humanity is that we all become like redwood trees. So I'll tell you the story of the California redwood tree. California redwoods are majestic and mighty. They grow to be about 275 feet tall, and the oldest coastal redwood is 2,520 years old. But redwoods have amazingly shallow roots, 5 to 6 feet deep. So that's about my height. I couldn't hold up a redwood, that's for sure. So how do they stand so tall for thousands of years with such shallow roots? The answer is very simple. Most of the answers to complex problems can be simpler than we make them, but the answer is very simple. They stand in groves. They stand together. Their roots merge and become intertwined. They strengthen each other, and they literally hold each other up. That's what Homeboy is, a constantly growing grove of redwoods. So I want to thank all of you for joining us, and especially thanking Dan for agreeing to my idea to do this panel. I think it's such an emotional, moving story. And it's more relevant today than ever because we really need kindness. and we need the love, and we need to affirm people that they are worthy, they are valuable, they belong, and they're, as Father G says, cherished. So, again, I want to thank Steve, Shirley, and Father G for being those tall redwoods, and I hope all of us can see some way to become a redwood. Thank you.